This is the Dallas Morning News.
Hello, everybody. Welcome into SportsDay Insider, presented by the Dallas Morning News. I am Kevin Sherrington, joined by my pal, Evan Grant. Evan, how are you?
I'm great, Kevin. I am, as we record this, I am about to start packing my underwears and all that stuff for spring training.
You know, underwear is a collective. It's just not, you don't need the plural.
Is that right? Multiple pairs of underwear are still underwear?
Still underwear, yeah.
They should be plural.
I hate that at this stage of your life, you still didn't know that. But
no,
anyway.
it was kind of a joke.
It was kind of a joke? Okay. Kind of one.
Yeah.
Like most of your jokes. Just kind of a joke.
Just kind of.
So you're leaving on Tuesday. Are you leaving today? Are you leaving Monday or Tuesday?
I'm leaving on Tuesday it's Tuesday morning.
Tuesday morning. Okay.
Yep.
Cool.
First workout is Wednesday for the pitchers and the catchers, and then next week the whole dang squad is there.
So have you checked the weather yet for surprise?
It's better than it is in Dallas today.
Well, that's not saying much.
I think it was supposed to be. It's usually about the when you get out there the first or second week of February, it's crisp and cool in the morning, but sunny, and then invariably like a week in, when you're just getting used to how beautifully and delicious and crisp and everything is, they have a set of rain showers that come through there, and it gets very blustery and cold for about 3 days. So I pretty much just prepare myself for that.
Good for you. All right. Well, we're going to talk about the Rangers a little later here to give a spring training preview, which I will pepper Evan with Rangers questions, and he will try to answer all of them. But before we get there, obviously, we're going to talk about the Super Bowl, and obviously, we're going to talk about the fallout from the Luka trade, and that will be an ongoing topic for us for a while here. I want to start with the Super Bowl itself. What a dog of a game that was. I got to tell you, you should probably not bet against history in these things, and saying that that the Chiefs were going to three-peat here. That just is motivation for the opposing team, right? And then the fact that the Eagles had already lost to the Chiefs in the Super Bowl once, and so those would be motivating factors. I just thought that I'm not going to pick Jalen Hurts over Patrick Mahomes, and in this case, Jalen Hurts didn't play a great game, but it was kind of a quintessential Jalen Hurts kind of game. He made the throws he had to make, and then he used his legs, and he's very good at that. And then the other thing about it was that, to me, there were two real MVPs, even though Jalen Hurts was the MVP of the game. One was Vic Fangio, the defensive coordinator of the Eagles, who I saw this stat. It was really stunning. They sacked, Patrick Mahomes 5 times. They did not blitz one time, not once. That is only, according to ESPN research, that has only happened 6 times in history where a defense has not blitzed the opposing quarterback. And in all 6 of those cases, the quarterback who was not blitzed lost, which is really interesting to me. Vic Fangio, is not popular around here because, he's the one who said, I've got a formula here for beating the Cowboys and Dak Prescott, which seemed pretty boastful at the time. And really, in retrospect, that seemed to be the start of Dak's decline here in Dallas. So whether he established a blueprint or not, and there are a lot of fans out there who don't want to give Vic any credit, he's done pretty good for himself. And he certainly did a great job in his game plan for that. The other person that I call the MVP here is Howie Roseman, the Eagles GM, who has now won 2 Super Bowls in the last 7 years with 2 different head coaches and 2 different quarterbacks. That is an exceedingly rare thing over a short period of time to be able to win not only with 2 different coaches, but 2 different quarterbacks.
I don't think you have ever loved an executive in the 28 years that I've known you, I don't think you've ever loved an executive quite as much as you love Howie Roseman.
You know, I do like him a lot. I don't know. I've never talked to him. I've never been around him. I don't know. But, you know me. I like proactive GMs.
You like guys
I don't
who
want
make deals, who sign players. Yes.
Yeah, it's exciting. It's fun. You know, look, as is well noted here, I grew up in Houston with the worst GMs in the world. You know, Inspect Richardson, who traded away, Hall of Famers and All-Stars and never got anybody in return. He made a lot of crazy deals. He just didn't know what he was doing. Howie Roseman clearly knows what he's doing. In an era, not only does he draft well, he drafts from the inside out, right? He drafts defensive linemen, offensive linemen, and that's how they were able to beat the Chiefs, right? Without blitzing, is because
they
defensive
played
line
a great
is so
defensively, and all that's above my pay grade. But it was clear that they just dialed up a great scheme and executed it against the Chiefs yesterday. It was phenomenal. For me, it should have been the whole story of the game was the Eagles defense and not allowing Kansas City really anything for three quarters.
No, and it was a flawed offensive concept by Andy Reid too. I mean, they didn't run the ball, and they didn't even try to run the ball. I mean, at some point, you have to be able to run the ball just to keep those people from teeing off on you. You know, whether you're getting any success or not. It really reminded me of the worst of Mike McCarthy. That's been the thing now with the Cowboys. They're trying to they seem to be trying to pay more than just lip service to the fact that they want to run the ball. They've gone out and signed an offensive coordinator who's basically that in name only, who came from the Cardinals and was a former offensive line coach. They've hired an offensive line coach from Kansas State who's very well respected by his peers. These, from people who know these things a lot better than I do, have applauded both of these hires. And I'm all for it. If the Cowboys can learn to run the ball well like they used to run the ball, I think that's going to be a considerable help to Dak Prescott. Because if he's not going to run, somebody else has to, right?
I got to tell you, this is for all of our listeners out there. This is the money. This is why they should be listening to us, because every other podcast in America today on the Monday after the Super Bowl is talking about how Kendrick Lamar killed Drake. And we are talking about the Cowboys running game. That's why we see below the surface, below it. I do want to ask you this, Kevin, is the Eagles, look, Howie Roseman might be the best GM in football. And I completely concur with your verdict on him. Again, as I said to a group yesterday that I was talking to in the morning, the Cowboys issue is not the owner. The Cowboys issue is the GM. And so there's that contradiction. Kellen Moore won a Super Bowl yesterday. Saquon Barkley running the ball won a Super Bowl yesterday. So I guess my question on all of that, to weave all of this together, Kevin, who was it a worse Super Bowl for, Jerry Jones or Drake?
Yeah, we were talking about that in my house last night about Drake. It's like, I got to tell you, I don't keep up a lot with the whole rap thing, and who's mad at who's dissing who and all that kind of stuff. And I did not know the song, of course, that won all the Grammys, the explicit diss of Drake, in which he refers at one point to singing an A minor, which is obviously a play on the fact that supposedly Drake has taken advantage of underage girls. That's pretty clever.
You also noticed, that Kendrick Lamar was wearing a lowercase a necklace.
Yes, saw that
minor.
Yeah, A minor. So that's pretty clever stuff, and I give him credit for that. I was in charge of preparing our hot dogs and stuff during halftime, so I didn't see a lot of the.
Did you really
singing.
do stadium food at the Sherrington household?
We did some, and we also did. We ordered. We got a delivery from Katz's. We had corned beef and pastrami too.
That may have been some foreshadowing. How many people were at the Sherringtons last night?
Well, not that many. We just had most of the original crew and only like a couple of extras. So that was it was a small crowd. So that was good.
Nice. We took the easy way out. I bought a bunch of dips and whatnot at Central Market on Sunday morning, and then we just had dips and other handhelds for dinner that just needed to be either heated up or were already out. So
good for you. You gotta go live. We had way too much stuff as usual. All right, what was your favorite Super Bowl commercial?
Well, since you mentioned Katz's, it was the Billy Crystal, Meg Ryan recreation of the great scene from When Harry Met Sally, which had been teased for weeks, but they were at Katz's Delicatessen in New York, and Meg Ryan put some mayo on her sandwich, and then proceeded to go through the same fake orgasm that she did 30 plus years ago.
I don't think you can say that on a podcast.
We can say that it's biological and anatomical, Kevin. My God.
Wow. We're breaking new ground on this podcast.
And listen, Kendrick Lamar said far more than that. And then at the end, the woman who said, I'll have what she's having, was Sydney Sweeney, to bring it all into the modern day. And I will say this, Gina and I have eaten under the table with the sign at Katz's that says, Where Harry Met Sally.
You've eaten under the table?
Yeah, well, at the table, under the sign. I'm sorry.
I'm just trying to imagine you and Gina under the table eating. You know,
we were hiding from the very rude servers there. Yeah,
come on, honey, come under here. Oh, I love Katz's. I have to go to Katz's every time I go to New York. I love it. Yeah, that's a good one. I did not get to see that one. It's funny how you miss the commercials. I mean, I guess you just have to be. Was that on before the game, during the game? When was that on?
I think it was on in the first half.
Was it?
Yeah.
All right. Well, I missed that. I didn't see it.
I was still paying the smallest amount of attention to the game at that point.
Yeah, it really was it was just such a terrible game. It's funny to me. It goes back to that whole argument during the CFP. Remember when we said, oh, look at these blowouts. See, these teams shouldn't even be here. Oh, it's an indictment of the whole system. Well, what is this? What was that? The Chiefs shouldn't have been in the Super Bowl? Is that what we're saying now?
Yeah, it should have been invitation only. It should have been the Bills.
Yeah, it should have been the Bills. Yeah, the Bills embarrassed themselves and lost, and then watch that. Wow. My favorite commercial was probably the Glenn Powell, Austin's own, who's you don't find out until halfway through that he's supposed to be reading Goldilocks to his niece and nephew, and he's telling the story, and it's a Dodge Ram truck commercial. And it's pretty funny. I liked it. The problem for me with these commercials now, Evan, is that there's been so much money spent on them now, and we're used to the shock value of the celebrities a little bit. And so this doesn't carry quite the heft that they used to. It used to be when we first saw these high production commercials that, wasn't that great? Can you believe that, so-and-so was in that commercial? Well, now everybody's in them, and so I'm a little bit worn out on them, I guess.
Yeah, we're old, Kevin.
Yeah, that's true. Well, we're just jaded, We've seen it all. We've seen it all, done it all.
I had to say this to a couple people last night. My best friend from Atlanta asked me what I thought of the halftime show, and I said, "Look, there was a lot of stuff going on because I wasn't familiar with the Kendrick Lamar Drake beef to the extent that it existed. I had no idea that Serena Williams had a role in all of this, so I didn't get why and at first I didn't even realize it was her on TV dancing." And I said to him, look, we're not the target audience anymore. I'm 59 and I've aged out of the 25 to 54 demographic that everybody is trying to hit. And so that's okay. That's all right. It's okay. I try and just learn as I go along and appreciate what the young people today, the young ones, what they're into and interested in. So maybe it's not my jam, but it was all interesting.
Yeah, I'm not. Listen, I don't really care about the halftime performances anyway. It's like when people get excited about somebody singing the national anthem. It's the national anthem. I mean, how many different ways can you? And of course, people do sing in a million different ways. I'm not that moved by all the ways people sing it either. I have to say, the most striking halftime that I recall is of course when Michael Jackson sung at halftime of a Cowboys Super Bowl in San Diego, and it reminded me of a line. We just saw this movie Back in Action with Jamie Foxx and Cameron Diaz, and not a real good movie. It's fun. It's a kind of lighthearted stuff. And at one point, they're married. They're a couple, and at one point, one of their kids asks them about something. Well, isn't this
Spoiler
weird?
alert.
And he goes, and he says, "Isn't this weird?" And Jamie Foxx says, "Well, there's a lot of weird things. It's weird. It's like, well, why we still listen to Michael Jackson?" And I thought, that was a pretty good line. I like that.
I mean,
it does make you feel
Michael, I will say this: probably Michael Jackson and maybe Prince are probably the most timeless Super Bowl entertainers that have been, right? And two of the greatest Super Bowl shows of all time. But look, I grew up with rock music, and so the Tom Petty halftime show, I think it was the Patriots Giants game, was a great one for me. But it's all in how you perceive it, and I think.
Well, how's it going to go? Look, how good is it going to be when they're singing 3 songs? It just can't be that good. That's the problem.
I will say that even for the 25-year-old that was in the house last night, when I asked Natalie if she was excited about the halftime show, her deal was it's 13 minutes and it's 3 songs. So, it's all cool to see the production values, and she loves, like your girls love seeing the dancing. She loves seeing the dancing numbers. But it's not a concert. It's 3 shows. It's 3 songs. So
yeah. And we're out. So speaking of which, we're out of this segment on the Super Bowl. We got to move on. We got to talk some more about the Mavericks and obviously the trade of Luka Doncic to the Lakers for Anthony Davis and change. And so it was pretty interesting to watch that game Saturday, in which Anthony Davis came out and played like a world beater in the first half. I think 24 points, 13 rebounds. A couple of blocks in the first half. He was just all over the place. The offense was running through him. The defense was running through him. He just looked like the greatest player ever. Then, of course, in the third quarter, he got hurt again. And that's kind of what he does. And for me, that's one of the issues. Tim Kalishaw wrote about that obviously is that you if you're going to complain about Luka's availability, you got to at least recognize the fact that Anthony Davis is not always available either. And I looked this up and I counted it up. Since Luka came into the league in 2018-19, he's played in 422 games. Anthony Davis over that same period has played in 367. That's a considerable difference, 55 games. So, I think on a number of levels, this can still work for the Mavericks from a one-loss perspective. If you're really trying to win, games, or you're trying to win titles, although it just seems pretty crazy to me that you would say, defense wins championships and we're in a win now mode. Well, you got to the finals last year. Just last year, you were in the finals and you lost because Boston has more scorers than you did, So I'm not arguing with the fact that defense wins championships. I'm arguing with the fact that, you got pretty far with the guy you had here, who's been to the conference finals and then the finals in 2 of the last 3 years.
I keep coming back to your thing that you said last week, right? And it basically comes down to this. I do think that Nico Harrison made the cardinal sin of general managers thinking that they are the key to championships more than players sometimes, because there's just no explanation for me for this trade making sense in the long term, other than a GM trying to be too cute.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think, and I need to go back and look at this a little bit more. To me, the thing about Nico that's interesting is that I look at him as a true believer, and by that I mean as someone who really believes in something beyond what would seem to be all reason. And we see true believers in all walks of life, right? And one of the things that's admirable about being a true believer is the commitment that you get from that person to that thing. And that is often a good thing. It is also often a bad thing that people believe in something so much that you can't talk them out of it. And I believe that Nico thinks that defense does win championships, and I'm going to subscribe to that philosophy no matter what. And it was kind of when he made this trade, when we've talked about the fact that he didn't get in return what he should have gotten from it. But in his mind, that's all he really wanted. I want Anthony Davis. If I'm getting Anthony Davis, that's good enough for me. It doesn't matter how much I'm paying for Anthony Davis. I'm getting Anthony Davis because of the kind of player he is. And look how good he can make us. Well, for a half, he was certainly proved right. He looks terrific, right? I would offer that when you're a big man, as big as Anthony Davis is, and you're trying to play like a little man, what we have seen in the history of the NBA over the last few years, as we've seen these kind of guys like, besides him, Kristaps Porzingis, another big man who has little man, moves and abilities and things like that. Those people have a hard time staying healthy. Chet Holmgren for OKC, they have a hard time staying healthy as opposed to the big man who just stood down there on the blocks, swatted away shots, turned around and got the rebound, hit the outlet pass, and that was it. You weren't asking them to do a lot of athletic things. They couldn't do those athletic things. And I think that when you're asking of yourself to do things that a guard normally does, then you're asking a lot of this person's body to respond to that. I'm not saying that's goes across the board, but it seems to suggest a history there, and also the fact that Luka or that Nico has liked players he has a relationship with. He has a long-standing relationship with Anthony Davis. He had a long-standing relationship with Kyrie Irving. He seems to prefer in these acquisitions people that he knows and knows well.
Well,
which
there's something
I don't have.
Or if you think that there's a makeup issue and a player, there's something to be said for that.
No question.
But I still I think we keep. It's a fascinating deal, and it's captivated us for a week. But I keep coming back to, maybe I'm oversimplifying it, but you just brought up again 2 great points. One, if you're trading a player who you've got physical concerns about, don't be getting a player who you've got physical concerns about in return. 2,
right.
If you're concerned that Luka's long-term future is going to erode at the age of 26, how can you not be concerned about a big man's age and skills eroding at the age of 31? So those 2 things right there just make it a non-starter for me.
Yeah. Yeah, it does. And then, to kind of go a little further with this thing about what Nico's trying to do, I admire what he's trying to do. I admire the fact that he's trying to give the Mavericks an identity. This is who they are. They've never had that. They never had an identity. Mark Cuban's thing always was, we're just going to get the best players we can get and put around, first Dirk and then Luka. And, in the teens, Rick Carlisle every year had a different roster to deal with, right? He's trying to build this thing, rebuild it every year. All right, how are we going to try to win now? That was the thing. Then there are not a lot of organizations that have cultures or identities. The Heat famously has a culture. The San Antonio Spurs have always had a kind of team that they were under Greg Popovich that they tried to build. But I think it's a good thing because it allows you then to go into a draft, and say, we want this guy, and we can get this guy because he's probably not as good as some of these other guys that everybody else wants, but he's very valuable to us because of what he can do.
His value to us and our ability to win is higher than it would be to other teams or to general evaluators. All well said. I still cannot find a level on which this deal adds up for me.
It doesn't add up because it's a 25-year-old superstar, and no one trades a 25-year-old superstar who has not been. For all the things that they said about him that I don't disagree with about. Yes, he's not in shape, and yes, he's been hurt too much, and yes, he barks too much at the officials. Those are all yes, legitimate beefs, but it doesn't rise to the level of a guy who's got a drug problem, a drinking problem, a guy who's a cancer on the team. Doesn't rise to the level of any of those things. They just didn't care for the way he played. They didn't care for the fact that he wouldn't stay in shape, and that this guy's going to help us more. You just don't do that. I don't know that there's ever been a guy traded, and there have been great players traded. Obviously, I think back on people like I think Shaq was probably in his mid-20s when he was traded. Wilt, Kareem, all those guys traded, but all of them wanted to be traded, and they were all basically all traded to the Lakers, which seems to be a trend. So for all those conspiracy mongers out there, if you want to say that the NBA just wants the Lakers to be good, they do want them to be good, but they haven't had anything to do with any of those deals. And I was glad to see Brad Townsend had a story talking to Patrick Dumont, in which Patrick said, yeah, he was on board with all of it once he was told that that's what Nico wanted to do, and we're not moving the team out of Dallas. Now, we can all say, oh, he's just saying that now. But here's the thing. He's on record, at least, saying that. And secondly, I'll just go back to the thing we've said all along as well. You don't move from the fifth or fourth largest media market to the 40th. Nobody does that. And the NBA would not allow that to happen. You just don't do that. The governors wouldn't approve it. That's not going to happen. And you then replace them.
I had a couple people mention to me, I think, and I haven't seen the soundbite, but I think yesterday Patrick Dumont was talking about work ethic and used Shaq as a guy who had a great work ethic. And I think there were a lot of people in Dallas who thought, you own the team. Dirk Nowitzki had an incredible work ethic. It shouldn't be that hard to find somebody who had a great work ethic who played for the Mavericks. And my point in all this is, it does again hit home for me that there is a little bit of a disconnect for this ownership group and maybe the general manager for understanding the identity of the Dallas Mavericks previously. And look, this was a team that it's won a championship. It's been to the finals on several occasions. I think it would be unwise to disregard the identity or the history of the Mavericks.
No, well, for sure. But, I need to go back and check around in the rest of basketball and other places where the owners are from. Do they live in the market? That type of thing. I can only think of
Kevin. This is also an unusual situation, right? Because
sure it is. Listen, everything is a hot wire now, right? Anything about the Dumonts, about Nico, people are ready to jump on anything and say, whoa, see, this was all set up to begin with. I will say that the one question I would like to ask Nico when I get the opportunity is that when you made this deal for Kyrie Irving 2 years ago, is this what you were thinking about? Right. Was it possible that you were making that deal just to have your point guard in place, your star in place, because that was the opportunity to get him at the time, and then let that work and see how that goes, and know that if I ever wanted to trade Luka, well, here we go. I don't know. I think it's certainly a possibility. We'll see. All right, that's going to. Yeah. I think that's going to do it. Evan, we're done talking about that. We'd like to talk some more about the Mavericks, but David's not here. David Moore is, I guess, coming home from the Super Bowl, which is, I guess, he's walking back from New Orleans. I don't know what the problem is. It's like a 30-minute flight. But
he'll
anyway,
be here with us next week.
Be back next week. Okay, all right. So now we're going to talk about those Rangers. As we alluded to earlier, Evan will be heading out to Surprise. I won't be going out there until the end of March. I always do the last week of spring training, which is good and bad. It's good in that, okay, most of the decisions are made, and now I can just pontificate on the decisions that have been made. The bad part about it is I don't get to do any of the fun stuff. The fun stuff isn't all the guys who show up in spring training and got no shot at making the team, but they're a good story and they're a fun story to write about. Don't you like that part of it, Evan?
Yeah, but you know what? I mean, and I hate to be this guy, right? But the metrics show us, right, that there's there's people that people want to read about and people that people don't care about. And so you try and make sure that you kind of, our sliding scale is you find the good stories, but also you try and make sure that you're hitting on the topics that people want to know about. And so I do think in some regards that's changed. It's not like we're just looking for somebody with a wacky background. It's got to be somebody that people can identify with.
Right about your wacky background. I don't think we want to do that though.
It's not that wacky.
No.
No, I
don't know.
The older
I think
I
it's
get,
wacky
the more I realize I've been incredibly unexceptional throughout my life.
Nah, let's not be that way. So, Evan, I would say for me, the biggest question going into this spring, and it's the biggest question coming out of last year, is can this lineup bounce back from what it was last year? Because with everything else that went wrong last year, the number one thing was they just didn't hit. And so was that an aberration? Will they get that fixed? Have they fixed it with the acquisitions of Jock Peterson and Jake Berger? I don't know that two guys can do that, although two guys in the right place, that's a pretty good place to start right there.
But let me give you two guys that actually equals 6, Kevin.
Okay.
And maybe even 7, right? Because Corey Seager missed all of spring training last year, recovering from that sports hernia surgery. Josh Young was hurt 4 games into the season. Evan Carter was never really the player the Rangers expected. Jonah Heim and Adolis Garcia both took steps backwards last year, some of which the roots may have been laid in spring training. And so my point here is you get Berger and you get Peterson, and those guys both address your issue with fastballs. You get Young and Carter healthy, your lineup all of a sudden is longer and deeper. And maybe that also helps guys like Heim and Garcia be more effective. But to their credit, both Heim and Garcia, I think, have taken this offseason as real challenges to show that they still have the ability to contribute. In Jonah's case, look, he came back from a wrist injury, a pretty significant wrist injury within 2 weeks in 2023, played every inning in the postseason, didn't get much of an offseason, and then came right into spring training. In Adolis's case, he had the oblique injury in Game 4 of the World Series, and spent a lot of time during the offseason mending that, and then had a slow kind of ramp up into spring training. And I don't think either of those guys ever got on track. So I do think the pieces are in place to say, yeah, the two big offensive acquisitions were Berger and Peterson, but that will be exponentially more significant because of the other factors. And every team goes to camp needing guys to stay healthy, but I do think we saw the impact of taking two real expected contributing bats out of this lineup for a significant portion of time, and really having Corey Seager have to ramp up all during the first half of the season, and then he got hurt again in the second half.
All right, let me just go over with you the guys that I feel like are most likely to make a bounce back. I'm going to start with Marcus Semien, because that's his history, and I would expect that he will be much more effective than he was this year or last year. Corey Seager, I think, will have a Corey Seager kind of year, because just what you said. I think he's healthy. Corey Seager is a Hall of Fame player. Can we say that? Can I say that out loud?
I mean, I think that he's on the verge. I expect that if he continues to play, Corey Seager is going to be a Hall of Famer. I don't know that he hasn't got 10 years in the big leagues yet, so I let him get to 10 years where he'd actually be eligible for the Hall of Fame ballot. But yes.
Yeah, he's a 2-time World Series MVP. That's pretty good. I don't know how many guys have that on their resume and are not in the Hall of Fame. But yeah, I think he's certainly on his way. So I give the middle infield every opportunity to come back here. And I think that Josh Young, if he's healthy, he's going to hit. The question is just whether he stays healthy. So I see that as a plus too. I tell you who I don't feel as optimistic about, and I hate to say this because I love Adolis. Adolis Garcia, I'm not optimistic that he will bounce back. He might be better than he was last year. I don't know that he's going to return to the level at which he played in the ALCS 2 years ago.
I think
I don't know that you could ever
Kevin.
expect him to.
I
don't think that. And I think that I don't know that Jonah Heim is going to be what he was 2 years ago either. And I just don't feel good about Evan Carter. I think the back issue and the fact that he has struggled against left-handers, it makes me wonder, is he going to be a platoon player at best because of those two issues? I think certainly we have a much smaller sample size with him, and he was a really tremendous prospect, unlike Adolis and unlike Jonah. He was a guy that we expected big things from, and we did get those initially. We saw that initially, but I just don't know that if I feel confident because of the nature of his injury, and it seems like it really, and I say that, and look at Josh Young. He's had more injuries, and it's always seems to be something with him. I just think that I see more of a proven product as a player with Josh than I do Jonah.
The difference in these two injuries is that Josh Young has had broken bones, and that Evan Carter has had chronic back issues. And I think that broken bones can be explained away sometimes as freak injuries or happenstance. Chronic back injuries at the age of 22 lead you to have some longer term concerns. All those concerns are valid. And I don't know how to firmly reassure listeners that they'll all be solved. What I will say is this. Carter has been able to do everything this winter. He's fully healthy at this point in time. On the left-handed side, I would point out only that in the big leagues, Evan Carter has had exactly 40 plate appearances against lefties. So while the numbers haven't been good, and to your point, you said the sample size hasn't been huge, I do think that he's going to get chances against some lefties. It may not be right out of the gate, but he's going to get some chances against lefties. On Adolis, I think in September, the Rangers, once the season was hopelessly lost, and Adolis basically, I think, acknowledged that there wasn't anything he could do to help the Rangers save the season. I do think that the Rangers were finally able to get through to him to get him to rid himself of the little waggle at the start of his swing. And they did see better results in September. And so if he was able to continue to work on that, and look, he posted some video the last couple of days to Instagram in which he showed some workouts in which he was working on both explosiveness in the running game and some stuff that would allow him to be a little bit quicker with his hands. It takes more effort when you get into your 30s, but at least he's trying to address it, right? I mean, that's all you can ask for. And the third, Jonah Heim, we talked about the injury in 23. We talked about the workload that he had into October. I certainly think the hangover effect could affect a catcher that played as much as he did. I think you'll get a little bit fresher Heim this year, and I think you've got a better option for splitting playing time to keep him fresh with Kyle Higashioka behind the plate as well. So I think there are all your concerns on those three guys are completely valid, but I think that there are also reasons to say there are logical reasons why these guys could perform better in 25.
Yeah, the thing for me is I don't expect them to go back to. I don't expect Adolis to play like he played. I think he's peaked, and I think he's gone the other side. I don't have his career OPS in front of me or what it was in 23. What was it in 23, Evan?
I think he basically was right at 800, and last year it was under 700.
Yeah, if you get him at 750, 760, and then I think that's probably enough. And then he needs to be hitting sixth in the lineup. I think if you could get
in 21 and 22, his first two full years in the big leagues, he was a 740, 750 OPS guy. In 2023, he was an 836 OPS guy. I don't know that the Rangers should expect 836 from him. I do think that somewhere between 750 and 780 is certainly appropriate. Last year, he was a 684 OPS guy. There was a 170-point swing between 2023 and 2024. That's that kind of drop is just it's cataclysmic.
Yeah, it is, and I think, like I said, if you get him for 750 or 760, that's enough. And then if he plays right field the way he should play right field, that's enough. That was always been the issue for me with Adolis. When he first came up, I said when they were terrible, why isn't this guy playing right field all the time? He plays it really well, and he's got a cannon for an arm. I don't care if he hits or not. Just play him until you find somebody else better. And so he was not a good right fielder last year. And I think he let all this stuff get into his head and about his offensive struggles.
The knee problem all year impacted him. Yeah, all of that. And I do think that this year, with Jock Peterson and Leody Taveras potentially on the bench, the Rangers will give Adolis some more off days from the field to DH him than they did in previous years to keep his knees.
And that'll be good. Fresh. And so those guys don't have to return to the level of what they were. They don't have to be the biggest slugging lineup in baseball to win it all. I think that they're starting pitching if those guys are healthy. If Jacob deGrom could possibly give you 150 innings, well, then that's going to be a huge markup over what they were, 2 years ago. Even when they went to the World Series, they didn't have a starter like that. They had some very effective starters, but they did not have Jacob deGrom in his prime or anything close to his prime. So I do think that they can win with those things. Then the question is going to be, I think they certainly are a contender in the West because the Astros are certainly damaged goods over what they have been in the past. And we know what the Mariners are probably going to be. And Oakland's getting better, but they're still not, the team they need to be to compete with at the top of the division. It's just going to be what happens in the bullpen. And as you pointed out, they've added a lot of players here. Do you expect Chris Martin will be the closer at the All-Star game?
At the All-Star break? That's a good question.
All-Star break.
I think that he'll be the guy who gets the bulk of the opportunities coming out of spring training. Whether or not that continues to the All-Star break, I think will largely depend on how he does those opportunities coming out. He just doesn't have a huge track record. I think there are options the Rangers could explore with the bodies they have. There's certainly been some internal discussion about potentially looking at John Gray in a high leverage relief situation. And if they feel like they've got enough bodies in the rotation, that's something that they could pursue, but I don't think that that's an opening day situation. I think the other possibility, and it's also a stretch right now, is I think there's going to be opportunity for Jack Leiter to make this team more as a reliever than as a starter this year. I think the Rangers still view him as a starter, but they're going to need some multi-inning relievers. And look, he's got the arm, he's got he's got the fastball velocity to be a power closer. He's got the breaking ball, for a swing and miss. The thing is, can he throw strikes? And what we've seen year after year with the Rangers, and remember, Kevin, they haven't had a guy lead them in saves in two years, not 2 consecutive years, twice at any point in time since 2012 and 2013. They've constantly been plugging in guys in the bullpen and in closer role. And look, so I guess my point on all that is I could certainly see a situation where Jack Leiter comes into the season as a multi-inning reliever, and as time goes on, he gets opportunities, and if he performs, he moves up in a leverage pecking order. So I think those are all the ways they could go. And I guess I'll answer your question this way. I think it's very possible Chris Martin could be the closer at the All-Star break. I don't think he's going to be the closer on August 1st. I think either the Rangers will have found an internal answer, or they'll go outside and move Martin. This is not to diminish Chris Martin's talents or ability to contribute, but I think he projects best as the 8th inning guy.
I'm really intrigued by the question of John Gray, and I always think of things like this. I'm big into, we read it, we did both of the houses we've lived in. They were both haunted houses, so I'm always intrigued by the prospects of bringing something back. And when John Gray came in that series in the ALCS, he bailed them out. I don't think that the Rangers would have gone to the World Series had it not been for John Gray. Just in that, he was tremendous in that series against them. And so my problem with John has always been the mental makeup. I think he has a tremendous physical makeup. The problem with John has always been the mental makeup, whether he can do this or not. He has 2 great pitches. That's enough to be a really great closer. I don't know if he has the mental makeup to be a closer. I don't know if you would want to put him in that position. I certainly wouldn't mind putting him in high leverage situations where he just goes in whenever you want to use him, which is obviously the trend now in baseball, as it should be. In some ways, that is more important than a closer, is to have that kind of guy that you can do that with. And they could talk John into that and make him understand how valuable that is. Then he certainly could be, an ace up their sleeve, so to speak, in that kind of situation. I like him a lot better in that role than Jack Leiter. Jack Leiter just gives up too many home runs for me. I just, he's just a home run waiting to happen at this point in his career.
I hear what you're saying. I mean, I certainly don't think Jack Leiter would be the first option coming out of spring training, but I do want to leave open the possibility that, hey, this is something that could evolve over the course of the year.
Yes, it could. As it stands right now, the DH is. You feel like the DH on opening day will be Jock Peterson?
Yeah, and then I feel like they will, particularly when the Rangers face some left-handed pitching. I think they will move some bodies around, maybe move an infielder into the DH role, and give Peterson a day off, and then just do some rotating. I think they will do some rotating around the field. And listen, we haven't said this, but I do think the emergence of Josh Smith, with hopefully the return to health for both Seager and Young, the addition of Peterson, and now a healthy Carter, and established Wyatt Langford. You've got real depth to this team that you did not have in the past. Smith and Duran give you good depth in the infield. Peterson and Leody Taveras give you really good insurance policies in the outfield. And so I think it's going to be incumbent upon Bruce Bochy to make sure that he keeps everybody fresh. Use those guys on the bench in the field some, use them at DH some, give your guys a little bit more rest and keep them fresh all year.
Yeah, this is the best bench that the Rangers have had that I can remember. Even going back to those
catcher, right? Because Higashioka is a legitimate, 80-game catcher.
Yeah, these are going even back to those 11 and or 10 and 11 teams didn't have great depth, and this team has a lot more. And not only does it have it, but these are guys who have played in big leverage situations, right? Or high leverage situations. They've been to the World Series, and so that's what you want. I think that's the thing about this team that I would like to see. And it was so disappointing about last year was that I feel like that. There were a lot of injuries, but there was a lot of mental, decline in that team last year. It's like, we knew they didn't have a lot of big personalities. And I think that was part of Chris Young's intention in adding guys like Berger and Peterson, especially Peterson, a huge personality. They need somebody in this clubhouse who's going to pick them up and keep them from sliding into the malaise that was last year, even in the bad times. Now, that is the number one thing last year was health, and that was the big issue for the Rangers going at that point. But you can't allow to have happen what happened to them either mentally.
No, I agree. I do think in retrospect, and I wrote this, I think in my spring preview story, that in retrospect, it's easy to see that there was a hangover effect, and that it lingered. They are going into camp healthier than they went into camp last year. They had, as we talked about, guys who were injured at the end of 2023 and the number of pitchers that they basically, the mantra all spring was, well, if they can just get through the first half, everybody's coming to camp healthy. There's guys aren't limited. So I think that there's depth here, and I think that there is a fresh frame of mind. And I do think, look, Bruce Bochy's had a track record. People talk about he's never repeated, but he's also had a track record of when he's had a hangover type season with his players, he's found a way to get them to bounce back pretty quickly too. So I think the conditions are right for the Rangers to bounce back.
Well, they are, not just because of them, but as you noted, and we talked about before too, with the other teams in the division. It's anybody's division, I think pretty much outside the Angels, and I don't really give the A's much of a shot either. But I do think that the Mariners, Astros, and Rangers should all be in the running in the division. The problem may end up being that you may have to win the division to get in the postseason, depending on obviously what happens otherwise. So
I'll leave it with this. I think Fangraphs did their projections for wins. They had the Rangers at 88 and 74 or 87 and 75, which, those projections all run a little bit low usually, but it was the second best record in the American League. So they had them as the West Division champion and the number 2 seed behind the Yankees.
Yeah, it depends on people staying healthy, but you say that about anybody who wins. Almost always they won because they were healthy. That's what happened with the Rangers back in the day in 2010 and 11. They got a lot of starts out of their starting pitchers that came out of spring training. To win, you got to stay healthy. Now, this is maybe a little more problematic for the Rangers than a lot of clubs, certainly at the top end of their rotation, but we'll see how they do. We'll talk about that more in the weeks to come as Evan gets grounded out in Surprise, and David will be back with us next week. So until then, we'll talk a little bit more about the Cowboys, and we can find out more about the Mavericks and the Rangers as well. From everybody in here to everybody out there, thanks, and we'll see you next time.